Hi, I'm Dr. Luann Fortune with the Department of Mind-Body Medicine at the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences at Saybrook University. And it's my pleasure today to welcome everyone here, along with my colleagues in JEDI and my colleagues in the Department of Transformative Social Change. We welcome you today. Our special guest speaker for this moment is Dr. Jeremy Pearcey. Dr. J is a Saybrook alumni, and he is also a very well-established entrepreneur and professional speaker. He has spoken at many keynote events, including on this topic. So he'll be bringing in his personal and professional expertise on stress management and conflict resolution in the program that he's going to be presenting today. So the program is a guided storytelling, and we invite you all to participate to the best of your ability. We expect that you will find it very evocative. And if during our time together you need to step away, as I've mentioned, we have a breakout room set aside, and there will be support for you there as well. As you can see, we are recording today's presentation, and after the formal part of the presentation, we will have time for discussion, for questions, and for comments. So each of our sponsors will be making some reflections and some comments on this. So before I get started, I just want to maybe pause the recording for a second. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. J. Pearcey. All yours.
All right. Well, thank you, Luann, for the great introduction. It is my pleasure to be here today, and the overwhelming support that I've received in trying to do this event. So thank you all for coming and being part of this journey through Black history. And really, I want this to be a journey for everybody involved. We typically talk about history in details and facts, dates, times, and things like that. And why I created this is because I don't feel that those are effective methods in really understanding those times. Yes, we can put ourselves and think about, what may have happened during the Civil War and how that impacted people, but we haven't experienced that. And if you haven't experienced war, if you haven't experienced slavery, it may be very difficult to understand the mindsets of people and how those mindsets translate into modern society today. So my only goal with this presentation today is that everybody has an experience that's unique to them around Black history. And I don't know what that experience may be. It'll likely be different for everyone, which is my hope. But I do hope that you have a unique experience, something that prompts you to think in ways differently than you had prior to this event. So that is my goal. And really, this is a meditative event. It should be relaxing to the body, but it can be emotionally evocative at times. And so if you find yourself dealing with that, please reach out to, I believe, Don Moss is the one heading the breakout for that. Is that correct, Luann? Okay, thank you, Luann. So if at any time you are feeling uncomfortable with what we are discussing, because there will be authentic stories from slaves talking about the treatment of other slaves, and some of that can be uncomfortable. So if you feel uncomfortable, please reach out to somebody. We can give you a safe space to talk, but we will open up the event for Q&A afterwards. So if it's not something that is imperative in the moment, then please consider just taking a few minutes and sitting with that thought and then bringing it up at the end of the event. So getting started, we will start with a breathing exercise. All we're going to do is inhale to a count of 5 and exhale to a count of 5, just to kind of get the nervous system relaxed. It'll help relax the body and mind. And really, this experience should be something akin to reading a book. So if you would like to close your eyes and you feel comfortable closing your eyes, please feel free to do so throughout this presentation. If you would like to keep your eyes open, that is fine too. I just recommend finding a spot right in front of you and focusing on that spot to kind of allow the body to still relax. So, without further ado, we can start with the breathing exercise. So, again, just match your breathing to my count, and we'll begin with the inhale. So, inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just keep breathing just like that, allowing the body and mind to relax as we begin this journey through Black history. And our journey starts on the west coast of Africa, where tribes are scattered all along the coast as they've been pushed westward as migrations of people have prompted the Black residents to move further west, now finding themselves split on the various coastlines. They have a simple life, one that is full of artistic expression, rhythm and dance, breathwork and storytelling. And you may find yourself around the campfires as a young person listening to the wise words of your elders, their thoughts and experiences, their warnings and their wisdom. And as you go through all of these experiences, you begin to notice one day boats going up and down the coast with just a few Black individuals inside of them. Now, these boats are long and thin and like nothing you've seen really in your life, but you see them from time to time going up and down the coast. You ask the elders what that means, and maybe they don't know, or they give some kind of answer to allow you a little bit of calm. And so as you return to your little village and the evening festivities begin, you can hear the sounds of people dancing and celebrating the traditional African indigenous culture. It fills your spirit, your language, your people, your life. The smiles on the faces as people dance and sing. The rich culture here has led to so many experiences, wisdom, and life lessons. But the next morning, you wake up and find that things would be changing rather quickly. The people that you saw sailing up and down the coast were people hunting for little tribes like yours. Because the Spaniards had told them what they would give them if they were to find other people to enslave. And so they assisted. And on this day, the sun bright, the sky blue, your tribe is invaded. You watch family members, loved ones, the elders of your tribe perish, your village burnt, roaring flames encompass every hut as you are dragged away from your home. You are dragged, beaten, and eventually placed on a ship full of other slaves, the chains clinking as you sit on the vessel. Nobody talks. Eyes are down. You can feel the solemnness in the air, palpable, encompassing. And as the boat sets sail over the next 2 months, you would watch nearly half of those in the bow of the ship with you die of disease or murdered outright. In some cases, they would even toss a slave overboard to lighten the load during a storm, or maybe just because they didn't want to deal with them. A month into this journey, you find yourself on the ship, listening to the waves as they crash along the shore. And as you hear the waves crashing against the ship, you begin to wonder, what would that be like? To arrive at this new world. You try communicating with some of the other people in the bow, the other slaves, asking what they are thinking, what their experience may be like. But because almost everybody in the ship comes from a different tribe, the dialects slightly different. It's hard to communicate. The waves crashing. The next month, as you battle illness, a lack of food and hunger, fighting disease and poor treatment, you suddenly find yourself on the shore of the continental United States. The ship stops after its 2-month journey, and you find yourself in a new world, this land foreign to you. Nothing looks anything like where you came from. The people are different. The languages are different. The trees are different. The smells are different. Even the color of the water here, darker, grayer, different. and you find yourself so out of the element that you don't know what else to do, but simply find some peace in this experience. And so you pray to your God or gods. You reach out to anybody that will listen or maybe can understand you as they begin to march you off the ship. Going down the gangplank. Oh, off the boat. Oh, oh, don't look head down, just go. Oh, off the boat. Oh, don't look head down, just go. Oh, off the boat. Oh, don't look head down, just go. Oh, off the boat. Oh, don't look head down, just go. Go, go. And as you set foot in this land for the first time, hearing the crickets chirping, the strange sounds at night, you find yourself in a new situation now, lined up among the boat, lined up, being prepared for an inspection. As the slavers walk up and down the line, inventorying their prize cargo. They force you to stand a specific way, the chains weighing down your hands and feet. The solemn journey has come to a conclusion, but the other side of that journey is just beginning. As you are sold into slavery, following your master to their plantation. And on this plantation, a new kind of life would form, where your identity is taken away. Everything that you love to do, everything that you did, your gods, your religion, your music, your dance, your customs and culture are now labeled barbaric or animalistic. Don't paint your face. Don't pierce your ears. Don't show your cultural roots, is the predominant feeling that you get on a day-to-day basis. Don't be who you are. Be what you or what we want you to be. And so you lose pieces of yourself on this journey. You begin to forget what gods you even prayed to, what customs you used to follow. You begin to forget little things like how to weave a basket, or the certain smells from home that now no longer linger in your nostrils. and every day you toil in the fields. Sometimes 18, 20 hours a day you work, and 4 hours of sleep later you work again. And if you do not work, you are whipped. And so you find yourself struggling with this transition to slavery in a new and problematic way. Because every day is stressful. Every day there's an opportunity for somebody to end your life without consequence. Your life is fleeting. In fact, you just heard that a plantation down the road lynched 2 of their slaves recently. Arguably without cause. As the causes of the time you know can be extremely minimal. Simply walking down the road with money in your pocket subjects you to racist discrimination, the potential of losing whatever money you have on you, and also being thrown into a jail. Because if you have money on you and you're black, you must have stole it. You know how the South works. You've been here for some time now. And you've heard the stories. And so, as you move into now the 19th century, things begin to shift, and you hear stories of various people. One of the other slaves told you a story. He says, "My papa was Lucian Doyle, and my mama, Europe Dupuis. I was born over in Louisiana, Lafayette Parish, between Broussard and Warville. I'm 97 years old now. I didn't have brothers or sisters except half ones. It's like this. My mama was a house servant for the Duhon family. She was the hairdresser. One day she barbered Master's son, whose name was Lucian. He says that he'll shave her head if she won't do what he likes. After that, she is woman till he marries a white lady. My grandmama was stolen from Africa, and she lived to be 125 years old. She died last year in April. I think I'll live as long as she did," he says. There were 15 slaves on the land what the Duhoms had, but I never ran around with them. I had a room at the back of the big house. You know, Madame Duhon was my grandmama. She was good to me. The only thing I did was look to my master's horse and be a coachman for the madame. Master had 4 sons. They were Regent, Jacques, Lucien, and Desiree. But Desiree was shot at the dance. My master had about 100 acres and cotton and corn. He had a slave to hunt all the time. He didn't do other things. The partridge and the rice birds he killed were cooked for the white folks. The owls and the rabbits and the coons and the possums were cooked for us. They had a big room for us to eat. Where they cook, they had a long oven with a piece down the middle. They cooked the white folks' things on one side. They cooked their own things on the other. They had each one's pot and skillets. I didn't play much with the black children. My time went waiting on my white folks. Sometimes the priest came to say mass. The slaves went to mass. The priest married and baptized the slaves. They gave a feast of baptizing. We all had real beef meat that day. And as you listen to the story of this man's journey, it inspires something inside you. It inspires a feeling that you haven't had for many years. Some would say that that feeling is hope. But it might be even simpler than that. Maybe you understand now that you are not alone. And over the years, many slaves would come and tell you their stories. They would leave the plantation and take their stories with them. But you would remember them and what they meant to you. You remember another story told by a woman named Hannah. My father was sold away from us when I was small. That was a sad time for us. Master wouldn't sell the mothers away from their children, so we lived on without fear of being sold. But my pa, he sure did hate to leave us. He missed us and we longed for him. He would often slip back to our cottage at night. We would gather around him and crawl up in his lap, and he tickled us for a long time. But he gave us these pleasures at a painful risk, because when his master missed him, he would beat him all the way home. A risk to see your child. What would that do to somebody's mentality? Knowing that the more you connect with those that you love, the more painful it will be when you are taken away from them. And this was not something that was uncommon. Sold down the river meant just that. That you as a black man were so disposable. You could be sold down the river at any moment, leaving behind your wife, kids, other slaves, friends, family. And just like that, everything you knew was gone again. And your identity has to be rebuilt. You remember another later description. On Sundays, I have seen the Negroes up in the country, going away under large oaks and in secret places, sitting in the woods with spelling books, the best and brightest were killed during Nat's time, referring to Nat Turner, a deeply religious slave who led a revolt in the early 1600s which killed nearly 60 white individuals. All the colored folks were afraid to play and pray in the time of the old prophet Nat. There was no law about it, but the whites reported it round among themselves, that if a note of music was heard, we should have some dreadful punishment. And after that, the low whites would fall upon any slaves they heard praying or singing a hymn, and often killed them before their masters or mistresses could get to them. Over years, you spent toiling in the slaves, on the plantations, picking cotton and corn. Your fingers now developing arthritis, your back breaking from the years of bending over. But now you have hope. It's early in the 19th century, and now you have a new opportunity, potentially. There's talk of a civil war, a war over states' rights to own and sell slaves. You've heard this war. Know what it would mean for your freedom. Now, you've heard about freedom, but you've never experienced it. In fact, you have never met a free person of color. To this point, you've only met other slaves. But you've learned to read, and you've been inspired now by the words of people like Frederick Douglass, who said, "I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of the land. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. Never was there a clearer case of stilling the livery of the court of heaven to serve the devil in. I am filled with unutterable loathing when I contemplate the religious pomp and show, together of the horrible inconsistencies which, everywhere, surround me. We have men stealers for ministers, women whippers for missionaries, and cradle plunderers for church members. The man who wields the blood-clotted cowskin during the week fills the pulpit on Sunday and claims to be a minister of the meek and lowly Jesus. The slave auctioneer's bell and the church-going bell chime in with each other, and the bitter cries of the heartbroken slave are drowned in the religious shouts of his pious master. Revivals of religion and revivals in the slave trade go hand in hand together. The slave prison and the church stand near each other. The clanking of fetters and the rattling of chains in the prison, and the pious psalm and solemn prayer in the church may be heard at the same time. The dealers in the bodies of men erect their stand in the presence of the pulpit, and they mutually help each other. The dealer gives his blood-stained gold to support the pulpit, and the pulpit, in return, covers his infernal business with the garb of Christianity. Here we have religion and robbery, the allies of each other, devils dressed in angels' robes, and hell presenting the semblance of paradise. These words resonate. You look around and you see it. The hypocrisy of their words against how they treat others. But more importantly, the identity that is still struggling within you. But freedom sounds nice. And so, as the country moves closer and closer to the Civil War, eventually Abraham Lincoln emancipating the slaves, causing the most atrocious war in United States history, where hundreds of thousands would die. And still, despite the times, Black people would serve in the Union Army in support of the cause. And Black folks would serve in every major war after, despite not gaining equal rights to vote, to go to school, to drink out of the same water fountains, until after the Second World War. But in the Civil War, maybe you fought and heard the stories of valiant men that served their country with no recompense for the lives that they put on the line. Because after the Civil War and the emancipation of slaves, there would be a fallout. Cries from folks in the South that they were not equal, that Black folks were different and deserved to be treated differently. My object is to teach the North, the young North, what it has never known, the awful suffering of the white man during the dreadful Reconstruction period. Thomas Dixon Jr., the author of The Klansman, would write later. I believe that the Almighty God anointed the white men of the South by their suffering during that time immediately after the Civil War to demonstrate to the world that the white man must and shall be supreme. The Ku Klux Klan would begin to organize and terrorize Black Americans in the South. They would fear for their lives. They would live in that terror. Every day, wondering if it was one of them that would be lynched next. Hundreds of Kodaks clicked all morning at the scene of the lynching. People in automobiles and carriages came from miles around to view the corpse dangling from the end of a rope. Picture card photographers installed a portable printing plant at the bridge and reaped a harvest in selling postcards showing a photograph of the lynched Negro. Women and children were there by the score. At a number of country schools, the day's routine was delayed until boy and girl pupils could get back from viewing the lynched man. A newspaper account of the scene at the lynching of Thomas Brooks in Fayette County, Tennessee. And these narratives and these photos would drive the hatred of Southern whites while impacting the fears of Southern blacks. And it was that night that you woke up in the middle of the night in your house, a house that you had earned. You'd been living there for just a few months, and you'd seen it happen to other folks and hoped it wouldn't to you and your family. But then, the glass shatters, and you run out the bed and into the living room, and you find a brick with racist slogans on it and glass shattered on your floor. And outside the broken window, you see a flaming cross. And hooded white folks on your front lawn. Your heart beats. What do you do? Where do you go to be free of this? Where do you find peace? And while there are many horrors throughout this time, as Jim Crow rises and the black codes take shape, there are amazing things that happen within the black community as well. Poets and authors are being published, and their perspectives of black folks and the black experience in society are being published nationwide. These experiences are getting out and starting to shift public opinion on how to treat people. This also leads to the rise in black politicians and states, and overall calls for more equality. And these calls would result in institutions like the NAACP being established in the early 1900s, and would also lead to the Great Migration, where approximately 1 million black folks living in the South would migrate west and north to escape the harshest conditions of inequality that persisted in the South, to get away from the Ku Klux Klan black codes and the segregatory elements of Jim Crow that had them constrained and tied down in what they could do and how they could do it, and even where they could live or stand. And these would move us into the early 1900s, where technology caught up. And the US government decided to understand slavery and what happened during those times.
And, just tied a hand this way, around the pizza or the tree. I remember that just as well, looked like to me, I can, and round the tree and whipped her. And, well, she couldn't do nothing but just kick her feet, just kick her feet. But it just had her clothes all down to her waist, Just didn't have her from naked, but they had her clothes down to her waist. And every now and then they'd whip her, and then snuff the pipe out on her, snuff the pipe out on her. The embers in the pipe. I don't know, you ever see the pipe smoking.
Blow them out on her? Good Lord, have mercy.
Blow them out on her.
Did she scream?
Yeah, I reckon she was. I reckon she did. But you see, we was daring to go out there where it was, because our old marshal was whoopers, and then Uncle Saul was whoopers. You see that as the overseer, Uncle Saul. So Papa was overseer. Well, he had a whooper. And whooped her too. He showed his whooper. Well, he whooped her so then at night they had to grease her back. Grease her back. I don't know what kind of grease they had, but they showed grease her back. At night, that way. Just grease her back. And so after they whooped her so long, whooped her then so long that way, they quit. They couldn't give her dinner. Late that evening, they gave her dinner. Late that, well, she so whooped so bad then, she didn't want to eat,
Education. I finished the 7th grade, and that was as far as...
All right, Miss Shaw, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born near Baywood, Virginia, 1909. My parents were James and Lucinda Greer. And my grandmother was a slave. Yes, my grandmother was a slave. My mother was raised, white people raised her from a child up to her marriage. She was raised in North Carolina. Now, where did I go from there?
How did it happen that white people raised your mother? How did that happen?
My grandmother was a slave, and she lived with these people. And she died, and my mother was a little girl about 10, 11 years old. And these white people kept her and raised her. She even went to school. She had she could read very well and count too. But I had 3 sisters and 7 brothers. And there's only 2 of us living. And of course I only have public school, I guess you would call it, education. I finished the 7th grade, and that was as far as they taught those days. They had high schools, of course, in Sparta, but they were not open to black people. So I finished the 7th grade when I was 13 years old, and that's as far as I got with school. But I did a lot of reading in my time. I did a lot of reading. My mother and my father, too, would bring newspapers home from the places where they worked, and I would read the news to them until they got where they could able to subscribe to a magazine or a newspaper, something like that. But I was the reader. They said the reason I read so well, I didn't like to wash dishes. I could always find something interesting to read at dishwashing time. So I kept up my reading pretty good. Let's see, I married in the year of 1933. And we have one child, and she's in Chicago. So it's just the two of us here alone. My husband was raised down in North Carolina, but I was raised practically in Virginia. But we moved to North Carolina. Oh, I think it's the year of 21.
And the stories of other slaves would be recorded as well, depicting the experiences of their life and how they came to be in the early 20th century. And these stories provide insight into those times. But the battle for equality would not end there. In the 50s and 60s, there would be legal battles challenging what it meant to even be an American and what rights you are afforded if you are. And so we see in the 1950s, at the end of World War II, where segregation in the military was actually shot down as commanders realized the need for integration was too real to the Allied cause. This would cause black and white military members to serve together and return home, having fought with each other and put their lives on the line for each other. The culture began to shift, and we see more and more white folks supporting civil rights. Moving into the 50s and 60s, this grew even more with people like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. And then moving into other important decisions like Loving versus Virginia that established interracial marriage and the Equal Opportunity Act in 1972. But even then, technology provided a lens again, like photography did at the turn of the century, to depict lynchings. In 1992, Rodney King was stopped by police officers in Los Angeles and beaten brutally, leading to riots that would follow after the officers were acquitted for beating Rodney King. And so the difficulty still exists. Things that Black Americans have dealt with persists. But now, Black people are in the culture. In 1999, Michael Jordan caps his 6 NBA championships. In 2000, Venus Williams becomes the first Black woman to win the women's singles in Wimbledon since the early 50s. In 2002, Halle Berry becomes the first African American female to win an Academy Award for Best Actress. And you start to see the cultures blending, and some of those epithets that have been held for so long start to fade away. But on February 23rd, 2020, Ahmaud Arbery, 25 years old, out jogging, is chased down by vigilantes in a truck and gunned. Then on March 13th, Breonna Taylor, 26, a black woman who was asleep in her bed, is killed in Louisville, Kentucky. And on May 25th, George Floyd, 46, dies after being pinned to the ground by an officer's knee pressed to his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The killings resulted in a global demonstration supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as changes to both federal and state policing laws. What does it mean? Identity. What does it bring? Identity. What happens when you lose it? What happens if it slinks into the shadows, never again to be seen? When it's tossed off a ship, the cargo's too heavy. When it's a ball and chain wrapped around your feet. When it's the N-word on a tongue just waiting to be screamed. What does it mean? Identity. What does it bring? I just want security. To be free, to be me, to sing in native languages innately, to dance with my ancestors, the beat in my feet, to look at their face and in them see me. To not be the only me in a room of 150, my black skin always viewed as a commodity, the violence they see in me before they see. Anything rise up inside of me. Is that my identity? Is that a black thing, to always be defined but never to be seen? To always be seen but never to be heard? It's a mishmash, a jambalaya of words, spoken without thought. To define who we are and how much of our lives should cost, despite taking away our identity and filling it with loss. Our identity may be lost, and the horrors that followed perpetuate the cost we pay. But today, I can say we have a renewed identity that's here to stay. The one thing I have learned through Black history is perseverance. People that could have easily given up, never tried, never fought, have found a way to persevere, to find some kind of meaning in their experiences that have allowed them to persist. And we continue to persist. So that concludes the storytelling aspect of the event today. We will now open it for questions and answers. If anybody wants to talk about their experience, ask questions about elements of the story, provide insight, we're here to just have a discussion. So I'll
Resuming. Jay, thank you very much for that amazing evocative storytelling. We all express our appreciation, our applause. And what I'd like to do now is call on our sponsors to offer reflections and commentary, not only about what you did, but also the place of guided storytelling in the larger healing individually and in the name of social change. So, Dean Donald Moss is the head of the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences at Saybrook University. In addition to being a scholar of great renown, he's also a clinical psychologist, and he is a global expert in mind-body medicine. Dean Moss, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Luann. And Jai, thanks so much for that moving, painful story. This is an event for Saybrook within Black History Month, and it's a reminder that Black history is American history. This is our history. The sponsorship of this event is university-wide. It developed and was proposed within mind-body medicine, but also supported by our JEDI Council, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and supported by Transformative Social Change in the College of Social Sciences. Luann mentioned story. Jai shared stories. The voyage of human beings used to being free, captured, held in a ship with inhuman conditions in a voyage to slavery. The story brought that voyage alive for us. Sold into slavery, a new kind of life. People used to living under the wide sky as free persons. Slave ships feels like ancient history, but the elements in so many of the stories were not ancient history. A story of a lynching and Kodaks, Kodak cameras and automobiles driving to the lynching. Children released from school. This was not ancient history. This was within our parents' lifetimes for many of us, certainly our grandparents' lifetimes. Human elements. The young girl who is the only member of the family who can read, escaping doing dishes. Human elements. Our own memories stirred by these tales. It brought back to me an image of television in the 1960s, a man named Lester Maddox, who I associate with an axe handle in his hand. He ran a barbecue restaurant and he distributed axe handles to crack the skulls of any Black person who wanted to enter the restaurant. Achieving that fame in the media, he ran for and became governor of Georgia. That's not ancient history. That's the mid-1960s. The names, more recent, Hammond Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Sadly, this is the present day. Black Lives Matter, Black History Matters. It's American history. So thank you. And I'm going to call now on Gina Belton to speak for JEDI.
I'm in touch with my autonomic pie, as we like to say, and some of the work we do. What is my ventral state, my dorsal state? This impeccable and skillful storytelling, integrating our mind, body, polyvagal, neuroscience, all of the aspects that speak to and tend to intergenerational trauma. Dr. J, thank you, and many, many warm bows. As I thought about what I might share with everyone today, I can't believe the synchronicity of what came to my attention, and these words from Ruth King, the founder of Mindful of Race Institute, celebrated author, educator, and meditation teacher. She wrote, "What is unfinished is reborn." This journey that you shared with us welcomed again what has been unfinished and how it is reborn. The term historical trauma was first developed in the 1980s by First Nations and Aboriginal peoples in Canada as a way of explaining the ongoing intergenerational impact of despair experienced in their communities from genocide, loss of culture, the intentional spread of disease, and forcible removal from families and communities. A shared story, our shared story. Enslaved Blacks in the United States also experienced this historical trauma so skillfully shared with our brother, Dr. J. Much harm was inflicted on Black bodies who were deemed chattel, including separation from families, branding, whipping, shackling, mutilation, and rape. All of this shared by Dr. J. When harm of such magnitude is deliberately inflicted, it makes the trauma more difficult to overcome psychologically, snowballing into communicable social disease that affects generational well-being for all of humanity. That's what you brought us today, Dr. J. What is unfinished? This recognition is unborn. What is unfinished is reborn, and the imagery of horror against Black bodies often witnessed by the children of the oppressors, as you just shared, Dean Moss. Ruth King wondered as she observed those pictures herself, how were those children feeling, standing next to their parents, holding their hands? I'm going to ask you to think of these questions for yourself as well. What was happening in their hearts and minds? They were not the direct perpetrators of these actions, but they witnessed a horror that was deemed normal. Were they frightened? Did they have questions? Were they opposed? What was required of them to fit into that moment? This is a question we can ask ourselves right now. What would have happened if they had objected or resisted attending? What price did they pay emotionally and spiritually to maintain that kind of belonging? How did they have to behave to ensure love and acceptance? We can ask ourselves that question now. How did they adjust their hearts to reside with such human hatred? And what did they do with their feelings? Surely they must have had some. Did it affect their ability to be intimate, alive, or empathic? What kind of adults did those children become? Are they your grandparents? Great-grandparents? Aunts, uncles? What did they teach their children about race and the value of life? What human price over the generations was paid for such denial, dissociation, rage, and amnesia, still present today? What unfinished business was passed down to the next generation? Today, Jay, you shared this important narrative, the deep healing of storytelling, because what is unfinished is reborn. It is important to acknowledge and attend to our racial programming and suffering. Shame, secrecy, and complicity will often distort and obscure the hurt and harm that are right before us. Right now. Right now. In every little microaggression, the death by 1,000 cuts, they awaken. Such traumas, whether known, unknown, or invisible to others, give birth to racial biases and shaping our perceptions, thoughts, and emotions, and influencing our actions. Old trauma, once a wound, is now a scar, yet when brushed against, just like today, Dr. J, we brushed against that wound, held in your tender voice. We are reminded of what must never be forgotten. The suffering that broke our hearts is now, with my prayer, hopefully waking us up. Omitiot. Thank you, Dr. J.
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Dr. Belton. That was just beautiful. And also Dean Moss. I'd like to ask our faculty colleague, Tony Bell, to offer comments now. Tony, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. J. That was an incredible journey that you took us on. And I actually really want to piggyback on what Dr. Belton spoke about so eloquently. When I was working on my master's in creative writing several years ago, I did actually did a long form poetry project comparing lynching to extraordinary rendition, which was happening during the time of the Iraq War. And in that work, I spent a lot of time with looking at lynching photos. And after observing the horror of the Black mutilated bodies, my attention began to turn to the children in the crowd, the white children who were in the crowd. And I saw a progression of the loss of humanity. In one particular photo, there was a white woman holding her baby, who was probably maybe about 2 or so years old. And the child's face is tear streaked and her face is almost contorted in horror, like a scream. And obviously, this 2-year-old child doesn't know what's exactly happening, but is conscious on some level of the horror. And then when you look at other photos as children get older, their eyes just became blank. And then maybe when they're around like 6 or 7, 8, 9 years old, they're smiling along with their parents. And it's really fascinating to see, and really brought to me an understanding of the ways that the practice of racism dehumanizes and forces like white people to embrace inhumanity. And in the work that I do, particularly working as an impact producer in film, I like to focus on centering the stories of the people who are featured in the film rather than a voyeuristic model. You have to go beyond raising awareness. I've also had a lot of experience in the nonprofit space, some incredibly positive and some incredibly negative, particularly around racism and anti-Blackness, and the very things that Dr. J talked about and how they're actually manifest today. In the workplace, because these practices aren't just carried out by police officers or government officials. They happen like at every level. Like we, Black people are still very much policed in many ways, and it has an impact. So with that said, I wanted to offer a few resources. I have a podcast, not so shameless plug, called What's Up with Docs. And this particular episode features myself, my producer, and a woman named Jennifer Crystal Chen, who is actually based in the Bay Area. She runs an organization called Represent Media, which is a support and artist development program for BIPOC content creators in the documentary space. And in this episode, we actually talked about a lot of our experiences in predominantly white liberal spaces and the racism that we experience. So the episode is interesting, but there are a lot of resources on the page because one thing Dr. J did so brilliantly was do what's called an embodied practice, a somatic experience. And in order to decouple ourselves from racism and internalize racism, it has to be an embodied experience. And the resources on this page really speak to that. I specifically want to point out Resma Mekna's work, My Grandmother's Hands. It is a phenomenal work, and he actually does workshops on a sliding scale, which can be very affordable for folks, on an embodied practice within affinity groups based on race, so people can couple these experiences from our systems, because something happened to our bodies and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to grieve that, and we can heal from that. There are also a ton of resources on this page for BIPOC therapists, which is something that I love, because when I began my therapeutic recovery journey, not even like 6-7 years ago, there weren't resources like that. It was like pulling teeth to try to find a BIPOC therapist who is trauma informed. And now there's so many resources. So you'll see there's an Asian Mental Health Collective. There's Indigenous Circle of Wellness. So there are a lot of resources if you really want to dive deep into decoupling these things. And then there are also resources on this page for white people who want to really unearth and decouple themselves from this internalized racism, because it's in our DNA, because this country was built on racism and genocide. So it is a lot of work and continuous work that needs to be done. So I just wanted to offer that. Thank you, Dr. J, for everything you said today. And I just want to emphasize that this work, if this is your first time doing something like this, I want to emphasize that this is a very important beginning. It's a very important starting point. And there is more that everyone and that we all have to do. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions about these resources, feel free to reach out to me directly.
Tony, thank you. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to the Department of Transformative Social Change and to the Jedi Council and to my colleagues in Mind Body Medicine for bringing this to this circle. But mostly thank you to Dr. J. So join me in offering a big round of applause.
Thank you all for helping me promote it and advertise on social media and things like that. I really think that this is important for people to get away from viewing others as facts and details, but view them as humans and actually think of what it would be like to live those experiences on both sides. Because as Dr. Belton and Bell mentioned, there were white people that are indoctrinated into racism as well. Like, this wasn't just, one side or the other, but when you're taking kids and introducing them to these things, can you expect any other outcome? And so I really just feel so blessed and fortunate to have this opportunity. So again, thank you all for joining me. I hope it leaves you with something that you can take away and maybe do something similar in your communities, or at least talk with people in your communities to help garner some empathy and understanding of how we got to society that is today through things like slavery and genocide and everything else that the United States has had to deal with in order to create some semblance of equality that still struggles, and we still have issues, but this is the best it's ever been. And we still have opportunities to improve it and make progress. And that's my only hope with this.